Hello, everyone, and welcome to Conversations with Catherine. My guest today is Tempe Police Officer Lindsay McCall Long. She is a police officer who's been an officer in Tempe for 10 and a half years, but she's been a police officer for 16 years, a wife and a mother of two, and she really is a Wonder Woman. It's good to see you.
Good to see you too.
So we were talking about this since January that we last saw each other.
Yeah.
Seems like years ago with all of the pandemic happening. And then, of course, we first met a couple of years ago at the No Tribe Summit. You are a fellow No Tribe sister, so it's always great to reconnect with you. I remember when I met you that day, I was so impressed with you, the things you had to say, because we were talking about women in male-dominated industries, but you had just days before gotten out of the surgery from you being shot in the line of duty. And I remember everybody was just wowed by the fact that you were there just a few days after this all happened, thinking, wow, like I said, this truly is a Wonder Woman. And I was just so impressed by so many aspects of you. So I'm anxious to talk to you because there is so much to talk to you about. Let's start by talking about the fact that you were shot in a line of duty. This was October 29th, 2018. Along with your partner, you were serving in an order of protection, shot 3 times in the right forearm, upper left arm, and in the left side of your back, which was caught by your vest, correct?
Correct. Yes, ma'am. Yes.
So you know the risks, obviously, being a police officer all these years, but when that happened, and as I understand, it happened fairly quickly, what was going through your mind? Was it like an out-of-body experience? Describe that for us.
The best way I can describe it, it's one of those things of where your brain and your mind are in 2 different places, because your brain is in pure survival mode. And my brain went back to everything I had learned starting from day one in police academy. I actually started my policing career in Georgia at Gwinnett County Police Department. And I mean, from everything I had learned from then on until being at Tempe, and then my mind was like, is this happening? Is this happening? Is this happening? But my body was just going. Like there's a lot of things that I did that I don't remember, that either somebody had to tell me or I did not realize had taken place until I watched my body cam footage. And to be honest, when I got hit in the back, which was the third bullet, it was right over my kidney, so it knocked my legs out from under me. So I fell like dead weight, like on my face basically. And it was only a short time, but I just remember thinking, I just wanted to get something to eat before this call. That's what I remember thinking, even though my body was like, we have to get up, we have to go. And for, I don't know, maybe a second and a half, but it felt a lot longer. Like I couldn't feel my legs. So I panicked and I was like, oh, great, I'm paralyzed. Then the next thought that went through my head was, where is the suspect? I don't want to look over my shoulder and get shot in the face, to be quite honest. And then I thought about my 2 kids who were only 4 and a year and a half at the time. And I said, Lindsay, get up. Like this is not how we're going to go out. And you have babies and a family to get home to. And I just remember pushing off of my right arm, and getting up and just taking off running. So to your point, it kind of was like an out-of-body experience because my brain was doing one thing and my mind had all these other things going on. But it's like when you're in a situation like that, your brain just takes over and it will tell you what to do.
And all that's happening while you're in immense pain, correct? Because I've heard you talk about the pain just being extraordinary.
Mm-hmm. Well, so my right arm, that was one of those things of where there was pain, but then there was some numbness. This one, as you can see, I never even felt that one. Another officer, that actually the first officer on scene to get to me actually pointed that out. The one in my back hurt the worst. In fact, it hurt so bad that you could not have convinced me that I didn't have a hole in my back. But luckily my vest saved me. I was wearing an Armor Express vest. I've already emailed them. I sent them the pictures because when the detectives told me you got very lucky because you got hit at the bottom of your vest, I'm thinking, okay, the bottom, like a couple of inches from the bottom. But when they said the bottom, they legit meant the bottom. Like I got hit in the bottom, the very bottom seam of that Kevlar panel. And so
That's
that,
amazing.
well, it made my knees weak once I actually saw my vest. A few months ago, I picked everything up from our property room, and I got chills and I got weak in the knees, because I'm like, wow, like, they weren't lying. And that explains why it hurts so bad, because your vest is kind of made to absorb a lot of the energy of an impact. But
Mm-hmm.
I took most of that energy because of how low in the vest that it was.
So taking into account all of that, your injuries, your experience, even just a couple of months later, kind of reliving it again, how difficult was it for you physically and emotionally to come back from that? And also for your family, I cannot even imagine how they must have been feeling.
Um, it's definitely had its ups and downs. It's one of those things of where I often joke with people, things get real when you can't wipe your own butt. Okay, because I'm right-handed, and I had this like a half cast and a sling and all this stuff that you're so used to doing. And so it was difficult, and it's a constant reminder of what happened, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, like I said, my kids were 4 and a year and a half at the time. And my daughter, I was still nursing my daughter at the time. So there's
Wow.
this period of time that I went through after that where, you're a mom. So, moms don't always get to stop. I mean, I've had great support. My family's been fantastic. My husband, my mother-in-law, my mom, my brothers and my close friends, but you're still mom. And there's just things that only mom can do. And to the point of my daughter, my husband brought the kids to the hospital to see me. I got shot on a Monday. He brought them to the hospital that Tuesday. And my daughter just looks at me and says, "Mom, boob." And I was like, um, I kind of can't do that right now. And she doesn't understand why, because she's a year and a half and she
Yep.
needs those basic needs met, right? So she even goes so far as to climb up in the hospital bed, lay down, because I nursed her laying down a lot, and pat the bed and say, "Mom, boob." So when I got home, she stalked me for like a week. Anytime I was undressing, showering, whatever. And at that time, it took me longer to do anything because of the pain that I was still in. And I just remember looking at my husband one day, about a week later, and I said, "You know what? I've been on pain meds before because I had my son via cesarean and I nursed him." And I said, I'm going to nurse her, And I think, honestly, that was a good thing for me, just
Mm-hmm.
emotionally, because a sense of normalcy set in at that
Yes.
point. And when she latched on, I laid down, she laid down, she latched on. And I just remember her latching on and looking at me and doing like a happy dance while she nursed. And I looked at my husband, I was like, "Do you see this?" And he's like, "Yeah." But, if anybody, if you know anything about like nursing and like the hormones that are released when you nurse, I think I needed that at that time. So
Yes.
that was a good thing for me, because then there was that connection, there was that release of oxytocin and everything that comes along with it. And, I felt needed. It wasn't a thing of where I was just constantly being taken care of at that point.
Mm-hmm.
So it's taken time. And, physical therapy, I still do physical therapy a year and a half later. And it's definitely a mental game.
What
Definitely.
is your mobility like right now?
So I have better mobility in my right arm than my surgeon originally thought, which is a plus. Um, Unfortunately, it's not where it needs to be to return to work. So I have some limited mobility, like when you pronate, like when you twist your wrist in, and when you supinate and you twist your wrist out. I lost some muscle in my right forearm, and it's the muscle that controls these 3 fingers here.
Mm-hmm.
So my grip is a little weak. There's certain things I just can't do with my fingers anymore. And either you have to adapt and learn new ways of doing it so that it doesn't constantly get frustrating, because that's where I was before,
Right.
or you just have to tell yourself, okay, someone else is going to have to do this for me, which is
Mm-hmm.
hard for me because I like doing things myself. And, you know, I'm like, no, I can fight through this. I can do this. And just sometimes I look at my husband, I'm like, can you open this for me?
Right. You know, I can relate to that feeling of being independent, and you know, when you lose something so valuable, whether it's physically, because I was paralyzed for 6 months after I gave birth to my daughter because a
Okay.
nerve was damaged in my quadricep. And
Yes.
that feeling of I just gave birth and I had to have people bring her to me to breastfeed. It's a very difficult thing to explain to people because, you know, you don't want to feel sorry for yourself, but at the same time you're so angry and you're feeling so many other emotions of
Yes.
loss of
Yeah.
the things you were looking so forward to. So the fact that you're saying that you're not able to work the way you worked before,
Mhm.
was that difficult to come to grips with? How have you been able to cope with that?
Well, to be honest, I'm still coping.
Hmm.
It's an up and down thing. Some days I'm like, okay, well, you know what? Life has other plans for me. And other days I'm like, yeah, but I want to put my uniform back on and I want to get back out there and do the things I was doing before. But I was at a friend's house actually yesterday for a birthday party, just a small get together, and he was checking in with me because he understands he's medically retired from law enforcement, and just kind of going through those ups and downs of emotions. Once you're no longer, you don't get to be called officer anymore.
Hmm.
And we were talking about that, and I said, you know what, right now it's a is what it is type moment for me, but I don't avoid or deflect those other emotions as they may wave over me. um, I have to remember that I'm here, which is the first,
A
you know.
blessing.
Yes, exactly, the blessing out of all this. Nobody had to call my husband and say, hey, your wife didn't make it today because of this incident. I actually called him from the ambulance because I
Hmm.
refused to let anybody else call him. You know, they were fighting me on it, the paramedics, and I love them to death because they're a crew that I'm used to working with. But I said, no, I will be calling my husband. No one else will call him. I was able to see my babies. So those are the silver lining, but it doesn't negate everything else that comes with it. Just like what you were saying about after you gave birth to your child, I can relate to that in the sense of with my son, I ended up having an emergency C-section. Totally
Hmm.
wasn't prepared for that and all the emotions that came with it. But what do people tell you? Oh, it's just great that you and the baby are healthy. That's the most important thing. It is overall, but that doesn't negate how you feel
Correct.
about not having your birth the way you want to, or not being able to walk after having a baby because you're like, this isn't how this is supposed to go.
Hmm.
You know, so I have to remind myself of that so I don't hold myself back from feeling when those waves come over me. But I do know that, you know, apparently I'm meant for something else. That's why I'm still here. I can still help people, but in a different capacity. I can still help people and not have a uniform on every day. So that was a little hard to get to. Obviously, you know, my family, they know I love what I do, and I've loved it since day one. But they're glad, you know, they're not like yay in my face, but I think it's a sense of relief for them
Sure.
because, you know, they don't have to carry that worry around with them every day that I walk out of the door in my uniform.
Hmm. Well, I want to talk a little bit about your family for a moment because your father is the founder and drummer of the R&B group Confunction, which, by the way, I grew up listening to because
Yes.
I have an aunt who loved Confunction. She sadly passed away a couple of years ago from ALS, but at her service, I remember I got up and I talked about how she just loved funk. So when I found out that he's your dad,
Yes.
I thought, oh, she's up there just really excited that I have this connection now to come function.
Hmm.
There's even a street named after your dad in California, McCall Lane.
Yes.
Um, he was murdered
Hmm.
more than 20 years ago during a home invasion robbery.
Hmm.
His father, your grandfather, was the first Black deputy sheriff in Contra Costa, California. Did one or both of those situations influence your decision to want to be a police officer?
So the funny thing is when I get asked that question, I always feel like I'm disappointing people with my answer because honestly, the answer is no. Um, That was a tough time because I was 17 when that happened.
Mhm.
And we just, it was on June 25th, was 23 years since I lost my father. And to be honest, I needed a job when I graduated from college. I had majored in criminal justice. And when I tell people that, they're like, yeah, but didn't you want to be a police officer if you majored in criminal justice? And I was like, no. It had the least amount of math classes, that major. I don't like math. And I can be a little spoiled. And I figured, well, what can I do where my mom will still pay my bills? And
Mhm.
that's go to college. Because I wasn't ready to get a full-time job yet. I wanted to go into the Air Force after high school because I was in junior ROTC in high school. But when I went in to get my papers signed by my instructor, Major Greer, who's now retired, she told me no, she felt like I was better suited for college. And I was like, but I really want to go into the military. And she's like, no, I feel like you're better suited for college. If college doesn't work out for you, come back and I'll gladly sign your paperwork. And I said, okay. Then my dad died 2 weeks after I graduated from high school. And
Mm.
I just felt like I just wasn't ready to go anywhere at that point. And, I had
Mhm.
my mom, I have a younger brother who was 14 at the time we lost my father. So I was like, no, I need to stay. I need to stick around. And I think for myself, I just didn't know what to do either.
Mhm.
So I eventually went to college. That was my major. I had to do an internship to graduate. I did an internship with Gwinnett County Police Department. And they're like, you should apply, you should apply. And I was like, they're not going to want me. I'm a suburban kid who still lives at home. I don't know anything about life. And they're like, no, you should do it, you should do it. Well, I applied in April of 2003, and I got hired the day after my 24th birthday in October of 2003. And I started academy about a week and a half later, and here I am.
And what was the family reaction to that decision?
um so my mom, bless her heart, she was very supportive, but on the inside, terrified.
Yeah.
My brother, he was the same way. I would hear from one of my good college friends that my brother would speak to about how nerve wracking it was for him to be out on the street. And he probably doesn't remember this, but there were times where I would kind of catch him following me around the county. Like he would find out where I was and magically appear in the same area, because, and he's the younger brother, because, and that's how worried he was. But um, I remember helping my mom in the garden, her front garden one day, and she had these beautiful roses, and we're out there, pruning the roses and planting some new flowers. And I'm telling her about this awesome call I was on. I got in a fight, I got in a foot chase, and I'm all pumped up. But I'm 24 also, right? And I'm so into this story, I didn't even pay attention to her reaction until I didn't hear her over my shoulder anymore. And I kind of turned around and I looked, and she was crying. And I'm like, what's wrong? What did I do? And she's like, I don't like your job. Like, I hate it. Like, I worry all the time. I don't like it. I just, I just had to get that off my chest. And she says, I know you love it. I can't tell you to quit because that's what you want to do at the end of the day. But it worries me. And those are valid concerns.
Mhm.
You have to, when you go into law enforcement, like, you have to take those considerations into your thought process. But your family also has to understand where you're coming from.
Mhm.
And I know some departments do a good job of including the families into police academy at some points, and having those tough decisions about what officers face and what they could be up against and what a family can go through together. Because if you marry somebody in law enforcement, you're in law enforcement too. Whether
Yeah.
you're the husband or the wife, the boyfriend or the girlfriend, mothers, siblings, everybody's involved in that. Because, the day I got shot, my husband had to be notified. I called my brother. My brother then called my mom. And then, my brother who lives here, I have a brother who lives here in Arizona. And I also have a brother who lives in Tennessee. All these people had to be called. So they were all affected by what happened to me.
Mhm.
So it's, it's tough for everybody. And, obviously all of my mom's years of worry came to one, you know, I don't know, like, it was a culmination of everything she'd ever worried about the day my brother called her and says, hey, Lindsay's been shot.
Hmm. Well, I think that in light of current events, it's really important for us to hear from someone like you and talk about what that's like from an officer's perspective every time you leave the house, what it's like for you, what it's like for your family. Given what's been happening, and I mentioned this to you in our email exchange recently, that I read a New York Times article about officers of color who share the mission of defeating racial injustice,
Mm-hmm.
but in uniform, they are still considered by people to be the enemy
Mm-hmm.
to some people. And the conflicting emotions that that raises for those officers. Clearly, you're not in a uniform right now, but did you ever experience situations like that where you were feeling this inner confliction about who you are and who you are?
It, it obviously, I've had a lot of conversations with people over the last couple of months because in light of everything that's going on with policing and the protests. And so it's interesting because I have my feet in both worlds. And sometimes, and I'm stealing this quote from a friend of mine who recently said this, but sometimes you're not blue enough for blue and you're not black enough for black. I've often described it when I show up on scene and I may have dealings or contact with other minorities. Sometimes it's a double-edged sword. Sometimes it's, oh, cool, I see somebody who looks like me, this is going to work out. And other times it's just like, you're one of them, you're in a uniform, so you think like them. And I have to remind people, I said, every day I put my uniform on, every day I was putting my uniform on, I like to lead my calls with being just Lindsay. Just Lindsay. I'm a person before anything else. Now, circumstances change where then Officer Long has to arrive on scene. But at the same time, I can still treat you with respect. And I do enjoy those calls where I walk away seeing somebody in a different light or they see me in a different light. And they're like, wow, like you're cooler than I expected. Or, I think sometimes as officers, we get so wrapped up in the call and trying to finish the call and jump on to the next call that we forget sometimes that the people that we're dealing with, they're human too. And a lot of times when you come across somebody, this is either the first time they've had contact with police, or maybe they're one of your regulars, or this is the worst day of their life that you're meeting them. And we do these calls so often, it is easy to forget that if I respond to your house for a burglary, you may not have ever experienced anything like that before. But I've already taken 5 burglaries that day. So to me, I kind of get into a rhythm, but you have to stop, slow down, use whatever resources you have around you, other officers, other agencies, other tactics, and be like, and be a little more sensitive to the situation and say, you know what, this is the first time Catherine's ever dealt with this. Let me slow down. Let me not treat her like she's done this 15 times, like I already have this week, and just take a moment. And sometimes that is hard. I admit I wasn't like that at the very beginning of my career. I was young. I just wanted to run around. I wanted to get out there. You get in, you get out. And then you have to remember that there's a human element. How would I want to be treated? And I guess where my dad ties into this is that I always remember the 2 detectives that showed up at my mom's house because my parents were divorced at the time. And to give my mom the notification because we were the next of kin. And I wasn't in the room when that happened because my mom sent me and my brother upstairs. But I always wonder, like, how that conversation went and how I would want somebody to treat a family member. I'm sure me and my mom have talked about it at some point. It's just not a conversation I remember of their delivery. But I would want somebody to treat my mom with care, and just because they were divorced didn't mean she didn't love him. They had a life together, they have memories together, they have children together. So it's a thing of where just treat people like people. And yes, there are issues that do need to be fixed. I'm not one to say that there aren't issues that can be fixed within law enforcement. But it can be difficult some days because, I mean, I personally know people who feel like I can't speak to what's going on because I'm a police officer, and they automatically assume that whatever we're seeing in the media with these officers not behaving the way they should and doing things completely outside of training, outside the law, that I agree with every single bad situation that's on the television. And that's just not true. I have had people that have picked up the phone to call me to have these conversations, and I'm more than open to have those conversations.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't like it when people just assume that it's like, oh, well, she's that way, end of story. And I know some officers who basically, some minority officers that have had their blue tested, if you will, just trying to see, even within their own agencies, like, well, where do you stand with this? And I've never had to feel like I had to choose between the two, because I'm both at the end of the day.
Right. Which is why I said who you are and who you are. And so watching from the outside now, was it difficult for you, to watch what happened to George Floyd, to watch what happened to Breonna Taylor, to watch the unrest? Was it difficult for you to be at home away from the job and watching this unfold?
I'm glad you asked that question, because just last week I said that to somebody. I said, it's hard. Those stories and those videos are awful, absolutely awful. It should have never happened in the first place. Clearly, there's just a lack of training, a lack of accountability, just a lot of lacking, if you will, going on in those situations. And the other side of it, I've had some people say, you're really lucky. It sucks that you're injured, but you're lucky not being out there. But for me, who kind of I've always had the backdraft mentality. There's a line in there where they're like, there's two firefighters and one is about to fall. And it's like, you go, we go. And so it's hard for me not to be in uniform and, being out there with my fellow officers and, fighting the good fight from the inside also. So it is a struggle sometimes, but the way I kind of mitigate those feelings for myself, I'm on peer support for our department. And I do reach out to officers, whether it's at my department or other departments, just to kind of get a bead on how officers are feeling, like what's going on, like what are their stress levels like? Because
how would you describe that right now?
Obviously everybody's tense. Like I will say, like people are tense overall, because the media can kind of portray one thing and then what's really going on is something else. So I've actually asked officers overall, officers are getting really good feedback from the community, pats on the back. Thank you for what you do. We know it's hard. Even at my department, we've had companies, drop stuff off for the officers just to say, hey, we see you guys and we just want to show our appreciation, which I think officers, they need that, because some of them are walking around like everybody hates them, and it's got to be an interesting situation to be in where you feel like you can do no wrong. Or do no right, excuse me. So it's like, if now people are watching officers closer than they were before. So what is deemed as something within policy, within law even, now people are looking like, oh, did you see that? That was bad. Or, because that's their perspective, then they put it on social media and then there's all these negative comments. I've even had to kind of on the side tell somebody, hey, like that's actually a normal tactic. That's not anything that is out of scope of what we do or what we should be doing in that particular situation, or just kind of explaining things more from the inside that the general public doesn't know. I've gotten some good responses from that, and other times I've gotten, oh, you're just saying that because you are a police officer. I'm like, okay, I gave you the information. That's all I can do. I'm not going to beat you over the head with it. But it's a little difficult, but I'm glad I can check in with officers, because they need somebody to talk to. I've spoken to officers from all over the country, And some of them have told me straight out, they're like, emotionally, I'm struggling, because the crazy thing is what people forget is, again, officers are human beings, but they were dealing with stuff before the virus, before the protests due to George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and so many others kicked off. So now they already have the stress that they had before, coupled with everything else. I mean, just talking to my friends that aren't in law enforcement, these are stressful times. These are very anxious times for people. So like I said, I try to do my best to talk to officers. Like, what's going on? What do you need? Some of them just need to get it off their chest and be like, this is what I'm feeling, because people look at us sometimes like, oh, well, you signed up for this. You should never be scared. You know what you signed up for, and I'm like, yeah, but I'm still a human at the end of the day. I did
Well,
sign up,
sure.
you know.
You signed up for this, and yet you still ended up getting shot, and that's not something that you expected.
Right. And the thing and the emotions that come along with it.
Right.
I think there's this perception of what you do as a police officer, no different than anything else. There's this perception from the outside of a particular job. Then you get in there and you're like, oh, well, that I didn't expect, or this I never thought I would encounter, because it is hard, even in training, to cover all the range of emotions that you may experience dealing with a situation. Um, and so I think it is a good thing that we check in with each other, just as society, period. But, law enforcement, first responders, as a whole right now, is very important that we check in with each other. Something that I mentioned, and I did a presentation earlier this year about my critical incident. And something that I mentioned in that was the fact that an officer who I'm close with, she noticed I hadn't been at work for 2 days prior to my shooting. And that was because an officer at my first department at Gwinnett County Police Department was shot and killed. A young officer, I did not know him, but it was a ripple effect. I mean, that affected me 1,800 miles away. And I was doing my duty as a friend and checking in with, I still have very close friends there at Gwinnett. And just, it took an emotional toll on me just because of what everybody was going through. And I like to call it, like, I did my digital emotional cutting, because I watched the funeral procession, I listened to the last call and all of these things, and it broke me. And that Saturday, my schedule at the time was Saturday through Tuesday. I'm driving to work and I just broke down crying on my way to work. And so I called my mom. My mom told me to come home. I was closer to work. I go talk to a sergeant at work, and he's like, go home and spend time with your family. And that's what I did, because we don't get to see each other all in one place, because my husband works nights. I was working days. We work opposite days. And, and I was like, fine, go home, have breakfast with my family. And the thing about that was, we go to a restaurant that was doing a fundraiser with the 100 Club, which I love the 100 Club.
Which is fabulous.
I love them. And I was like, cool, we'll get a meal because I want to give money to them. Well, who knew that 3 days later, the 100 Club will be coming to my hospital room to offer me, help. And so that came full circle, which is crazy every time I think about it. I have a great relationship with them now. But going back to that Monday, my friend sees me and she says, hey, you haven't been here for the last couple of days. Like, is everything okay? Which she was used to me coming in and checking in with her, because she was pregnant at the time and she was on light duty. And I just wanted to see her face and make sure she had everything she needed. And she noticed I wasn't in my normal routine. I told her everything that had been going on with that officer that Gwinnett County lost. His name was Officer Antoine Tony. And I got to unload a lot of those emotions that I was feeling. And it was, I think about her often, and it makes me teary, because it's crappy, because I had that conversation with her, and then 6 hours later, she hears me being shot on the radio. And
I can't imagine.
Her, which, and I'm like, could you imagine, like, she's pregnant, so how emotional you can be when you're pregnant anyway. And then
I'm sure that hit her hard.
Yeah, and we've talked about it since, and I even got the pleasure of participating in a de-escalation training that my department put on at the top of the year. And I was talking about our peer support team, And I mentioned, I said, I think a lot of officers, we do ourselves a disservice every day by walking past each other and not truly checking in with each other. Not just saying, hey, Catherine, over my shoulder, how are you? But I don't stop by saying, hey, Catherine, how are you doing today? Pause. That pause, you would be surprised at the things that I hear when I pause. And my friend was in one of those classes that I got to help instruct. And I got to share that story in front of everybody. And I said, she quite possibly saved my life that day because I was still kind of in my head about everything that I had experienced over that week. Because Officer Tony was shot on October 20th. I was shot on October 29th. So it's only 9 days, right?
Right.
So I got to unload all those emotions before going out.
You got to process them.
Yep. And I told her, I said, I could have still been in my head about those emotions when the bullet started flying, and so I thank her often, like, thank you for allowing me to get that out. So I think that's something we have to be more comfortable with. I know, like, mental health in law enforcement has changed. It is changing here in Arizona. There are more resources for officers. The newer generation gets the benefit of not feeling ashamed for needing help. I often tell people I'm in therapy. I was actually seeing a therapist before the shooting, just because I wanted to maintain just like an even keel there and just be in a good place emotionally for my family all the time, because they shouldn't have to suffer because I'm not in a good place. So it's my job to make sure I'm in a good place so my family is in a good place. So I think that's something we have to get more comfortable with. Therapy is not a bad thing. You don't have to do it forever. You can do it for a few months and check in, and just sometimes you need someone else to hear you, because I think as first responders, it's real easy to think, well, I go on calls and I solve other people's problems all day. I can solve
What about mine?
Yeah, that should be easy, right? And even with all the skill that you have, even some of the older officers that I'm friends with at my department who are longtime peer support members, they come from a social work background, a counseling background. Even with all that knowledge, as a friend of mine at work says, a fish doesn't know they're wet. So it's hard to solve your own problems. You need an outside person. And so I understand that overall, not everybody, but generally in my line of work, we don't always ask for help, because that's looked at as a weakness. So that's why I don't mind going to people and saying, hey, like, what's going on? Like, let's talk about it. So, and it's nice that I get the opportunity to be able to talk to people from other departments, because then you kind of get a bead on what it's like in other regions of the country, other parts of the state, and what their peer support may look like or not. So I've had a great experience with Tempe's peer support.
It sounds like it's appreciated too, that support that you're able to offer your fellow officers, and the women especially. You're a woman in a male-dominated field. We're seeing more and more women officers being hired since you were hired. Your chief is a woman. The Phoenix Police Chief is a woman. What would your best advice be for a woman who is considering a job in law enforcement?
I would say, be you. Don't let the job make you into something that you're not. I'm naturally more of a tomboy, so that's always been my personality. But if that's not your personality as a female, that's not what you have to do. I've been guilty of that in my earlier years, of feeling like I had to be one of the guys all the time. Well, that's just not the case, because I'm a female at the end of the day, and it's okay to be a female. As a matter of fact, Major Greer from ROTC in high school, I remember her always telling me, yes, you wear a uniform. She says, I've worn a uniform for 20 plus years now, but I can always be feminine in a uniform. She would always have her, you have to pull your hair up in a ponytail, but she always had a nice little bang, just minimal makeup and earrings. And she says, you can still be a female. You don't have to be a male, or try to be a male. So that's something I would definitely tell and I try to tell some of the newer females that come in, just be who you are. Don't get caught up in what you think other people want you to be, because at the end of the day, you have to go home with yourself and you know who you really are as a person. And if you're showing something at work and that's not who you are on the inside, you're going to end up butting heads with that at some point. And what I found too is I've always prided myself on being one of the guys, right? Mm-hmm. Well, guys can't have babies. I had a baby and I saw how different, I'm not going to say I was treated differently, like in a negative way, but you're going to be treated differently at work because you're now a pregnant female, you're now a mom. And, guys, they get a little protective of you, even though you went through the same training and everything like that. They can get a little more protective of you. And then you'll see like, oh, wow, so I'm not just one of the guys anymore. Mm-hmm. So even just having to think about things at work, like after I had my son, trying to pump at work,
we should mention too that you changed the lactation policy. Well, you created one, helped create one for the department.
Right. And I just, luckily I had a conversation with my chief, and she kind of helped get the ball rolling with that. And that's something that I am proud of, because again, that's a difference between male officers and female officers right there. But I didn't want it to be a thing of where it excluded men, because we have quiet rooms now. Because at first people kept calling them lactation rooms. I said, well, no, they're quiet rooms because we already had a couple, but now we have more around the city, so everybody can use them. If you have a mom who needs to lactate, she can go, who's lactating, she can go pump. But if you have a male or female, doesn't matter. People can, go take a break, decompress after a tough call before you get back out there. Or if you have other medical things going on, you can take care of that. Or just, like I've mentioned before, some officers work at night and have court first thing in the morning. You have somewhere where you can lay your head instead of going in directly in the court looking stressed out and like you just worked all night, know? So, I wanted it to be a thing that helped everyone. And then female officers, or female employees, I should say, that's one less thing they have to worry about at work, because now they know it's an option. I'm very comfortable talking about breastfeeding. I understand not all women are, but for the ones who aren't, that's why there's people like me, because I'm comfortable talking about it. You may not feel comfortable talking to a supervisor, male or female, about it. But now there's this thing already in place. We don't have to have a discussion. It's already set up. We don't have to work anything out. So that's something I do take pride in. And, I'm always willing to be an advocate for working moms and working parents in general, because, it's hard trying to juggle both. It really can be difficult.
It is. And that's why I go back to when we first met. I was so impressed by everything that you have been able to do in your profession, for women, for your profession. And I'm just really anxious to see what you end up doing from this point forward. Have you thought about that?
I haven't just yet. We will see. I was just telling my husband yesterday, I'm at a point of where I'm okay with just keeping that energy open and free flowing and see what comes my direction. I've had a lot of good opportunities through the No Group. I mean, that's something I've ever since joining No, that's definitely been something I try to express to other professionals or even other law enforcement about being involved in something that's outside of what you do every day. Because it's very easy to get wrapped up in only having people around you that do what you do, especially police officers. We tend to be a tight-knit group. It's like, oh, well, it's easier for me to hang out with other officers because they understand and this, that, and other. But you have to have people that are different than you also. I've done a really good job of maintaining friends that I've had since high school. Our academy did a good job of harping on keep your outside friends. Don't look up, and everybody you hang out with is a police officer. So, and I even told two of my really good friends from high school who I met in RLTC, hey, listen, if you ever see me starting to become something you're not used to seeing, say something.
Let me know.
And so,
Yeah.
yes, we've done a good job. One of my best friends, he's an FBI agent, and me and him, we do a very good job of going back and forth and keeping each other in check for ourselves and for our families, because that's important. And being involved in no, I'm not going to lie, in the beginning, it was a little intimidating to me because.
Well, if it makes you feel any better, it was for me too, because you have so many different women from so many different walks of life and so
Right.
many professions and so many high achieving women. And it's hard not to walk into a room and feel intimidated for a minute. And then you
Yes.
realize everybody's in that room
Mhm.
for the same reason. We're all interested in elevating each other.
And 100%, you said exactly what I was about to say. I would kind of like the first, I'd say like 2, almost 3 events, I was kind of like a fly on the wall, because I'm like, I don't have my own business. Like, I work for somebody, I go, I have a structured job, I haven't had to start from the ground up. And but then, like, once you start talking to the women in the room, it's like, oh wow, we have more in common than I thought. So it's nice, and it's, we can be cheerleaders for each other. We can boost each other up, and we can kind of bounce ideas off of one another. And so that's kind of opened a whole new world. And I remember thinking one time, like, wow, like, were all these opportunities for me here the whole time and I just didn't see them, or has what happened to me obviously opened some doors here and there? And I said, I've gotten the opportunity to do some things, and I said, it sucks to get shot to be able to do these things. But some of the things I've done, they were things I was working on already. It just happened sooner because of the no group and because of my injury. And so that's great. And it's actually encouraged me to try other things that I would not have normally tried, because I was so comfortable being in my box. So it's nice to do things like just a hobby, or just an organization that's so different than what you do every day, because it can really open your eyes to other things.
Well, it is a good reminder of being able to step outside of our comfort zone. And I think this pandemic has created an opportunity for a lot of people to do that, which I think is one of the blessings that we can take away from it. I heard you speak on a podcast recently where you talked about one of your lifelong dreams is to do voiceover work. And so I'm thinking maybe there's a podcast in your future.
It's funny. I did. There is a podcast, another interview that I did, and the guy who I did the interview with, I've known for a long time, and he has approached me about us doing something together, which I just kind of laugh about, because I'm like, how did I end up here? Like, I just remember being in, even in ROTC, I have to credit my public speaking to ROTC, because Major Greer saw something in me that I never saw. And I was just shy. I went right to the back of the room. I didn't want anybody to talk to me. And then all of a sudden I'm given a position, and I'm like, I think I'm going to go to the counselor and have this change. Like, I don't want to do this. And then I ended up staying in the class, and then she gave me an assignment, and she says, here, we have a ceremony coming up. I want you to do the speech. And I was like, about that. See, I have this thing called stage fright. So no, I won't be doing that, which is funny, because my mom, who graduated with a degree in drama and lighting from Howard University, that's what she's all about, right? Not me. And so Major Greer pushed me and pushed me and pushed me, and to the point where up until I graduated from high school, I spoke at the majority of our ceremonies. So I wanted to pay it forward to her by coming back as a guest speaker as often as I could, which I was successful in doing that, because I want the kids to see, because the demographic at the school has changed a lot since I was there, but I wanted the kids to see that somebody who walked these same halls has all this opportunity. And the things that I learned in ROTC, I'm 40 years old, and there are things that I learned in ROTC that I still use to this day that I'm now instilling in my kids. So that's something I felt like I owed it to Major Greer to pay it forward with the kids there. And I thank her often. Anytime I do an interview like this, or I have a public speaking engagement, I always let her know that. And I always, thank her. She's like a second mom. My mom even says that. She says she was able to bring out things in you that I just wasn't able to do. And my mom thanks her all the time for it.
Mm-hmm. There are no coincidences in life, is what I like to say. So clearly she was meant to be in your life.
Yeah, of course. And I thank her often, and I try to thank other people often that have helped me along the way, because it's like, even Monique Perez, who got me involved in No. Like, it's just one thing leads to another. And I go back and thank her. Certain public speaking things that I've been able to do. There's another woman from the group, Desiree Alcott. I also thank her because I went to a class that she suggested, and then that led to something else. So I think it's always important that we go back and we thank one another also, because, what could be like a small gesture of, hey, I can't make this class, but is this something you're interested in, can lead to something else. And I think we need to acknowledge that when we're dealing with one another. So I'm very grateful to the group. I'm very grateful to Noble, which is the national organization of Black law enforcement executives. Also, I'm the secretary for the local chapter here. And through some trainings, I've got to meet like all walks of life, law enforcement, top to bottom, males and females of all different ethnicities, that just opened my eyes to what can be. So I really appreciate organizations like that. ABLE is another one, which is Arizona Black Law Enforcement Employees. All these different functions and organizations I've been involved in have led to me talking to you right now, basically.
Well, I, for one, appreciate your courageous voice, your inspiring voice, your empowering voice. You certainly have a lot to say, and I seriously think you should consider that podcast.
Thank you.
because you are an example for women, especially about, just being able to do whatever it is that you want to do and stepping outside your comfort zone to make it happen.
I appreciate that.
Yeah. Well, thank you for joining me. It's been such a pleasure.
Well, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Always so insightful. You are always so insightful.
Thanks so much for watching Conversations with Catherine. Please remember to hit the subscribe button, like, and comment while you're here. I'll see you next time.